Welcome to Nothing But the Facts. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 6 of Amit-Hub, Nothing But the Facts. Hope you all enjoyed the little improvement we had to the previous video in terms of video production, a little bit of a intro and soundbite, a logo, so things are looking up, so very excited. That being said, this episode is about Rafa Nadal and his retirement. If you don't know, he's a legendary tennis player. Just been playing tennis at an elite level, top of the sport for almost 20 years now. And today he played his final singles match ever in the Davis Cup, which is like a World Cup equivalent of tennis. And for me, it's just a really sad day, because Nadal has been, if you really think about it, my favorite athlete, the most constant athlete in my life, the one I've looked up to ever since I was really young. I mean, everyone talks about 2008 Wimbledon match against Federer as being, the turning point in tennis and all of that. But obviously I have recollections of that. I was not too young to watch tennis, but obviously didn't remember it too well. 2010, however, US Open, when he won against Djokovic, was the first time I remember spending a whole Sunday of my life just watching the match, looking at the post-match, being inspired by, some guy who was so young, achieving such great things, and, just bringing this sort of mentality to not just sport, but life, about always persevering, playing like every moment of your life counts. And even though obviously all this stuff didn't register with me at that age, it definitely struck a chord, and it stayed with me till that. So I guess what I want to do this episode is kind of obviously acknowledge the moment, but also talk about why I think Nadal is just so important to me and the sport of tennis in general. And I think the best way to do that is to start with a little crash course on the history of tennis, a little bit, really fast. So tennis obviously became a professional sport, meaning that people could play the sport and make money starting in 1969. And this was a big thing called the Open Era. It's the first time that athletes were no longer amateurs who were restricted from making money. And ever since then, with wooden rackets, the sport kind of was focused on the serve and a volley sort of game. So serve and volley basically dictated and dominated the sport till about the 70s and 80s, where John McEnroe, you might have heard of him, and Bjorn Borg, really legendary Swedish player, really changed the game in the sense that they brought this style and power, and for Borg especially, a two-handed backhand to the game, which really showed people that this game is so adaptable, and there's there's another dimension to the sport that no other racket sport had, partly because of the size of the court, the athleticism that the game required, the ball speed and all of that, and that really took tennis to a new level of fame and popularity overall. From then, I think the game probably developed again in about the 90s, when graphite and rackets and carbon fiber rackets were introduced, and that just gave people a whole nother level of confidence on their rallying game, and we call it the baseline game. And that's really personified by Andre Agassi, Pete Sampras, I think Ivan Lendl, all these guys who basically for the first time in tennis history were able to constantly rally and not worry about the fact that the sweet spot on their racket was really, something to worry about because it's such a high quality, powerful racket. Why am I saying all of this? Well, in the 90s, it felt that tennis kind of reached a point of stagnation. Why do I say that? It's pretty much because these rackets were developed and all these players were playing a very similar way, and now everyone was just going to have a slightly bigger serve, a slightly bigger forehand, have a bit more consistency, and the game wasn't really going to evolve. Now, I can't talk about Nadal without talking about Roger Federer. When Federer came to the scene, he really transformed the game. He added this style, this panache, this unbelievable technique, beauty to the game that no one had ever seen. And what's more, he was just absolutely dominant. I think he wiped out every single person who really came his way, to the point that I once again believe that tennis was at this like inflection point. You have finally someone who has changed the game, but it's extremely boring because there's no rival. So honestly, I think that's where to me tennis really faced its real litmus test, and that really hit itself in the emergence of Rafa Nadal. Rafa, this at that point probably 17, 18-year-old Spaniard from a small little island with these pirate shorts and tank tops and his long hair, was like such a maverick at that time. Ended up just being, honestly, probably the first person of that age with that level, that power, and that just success on the tour ever. And I think because of how dynamic he was, the fact that he was lefty to Federer's righty, the difference of styles, the difference of mentalities, different of identities, Spain versus Switzerland, his rivalry with Federer really made the sport reach a new high, and that was really amazing to me. And I just remember, ever since I was a kid, watching the way he committed himself to every point, and watching the way he would dominate on the clay. Clay meaning like one of the surfaces in tennis. And when he would play, the ball would jump a different way. There'd just be a different sort of ambience in the crowd when they watched him play. His movement was another level. His forehand was another level. The reaction from other players was another level. And I was just so inspired, honestly. And the dominancy really demonstrated, especially at the French Open, Roland Garros in Paris, one of the main Grand Slams, I think is unparalleled in sports. Which is why I think now that he's retiring, his legacy is so strong, because it's more than just the success. He doesn't have the most of most things. Like he's not the record breaker in every part of tennis. That's Djokovic, who I will have to admit is probably statistically and probably the greatest tennis player of all time. But he's not the guy who inspired me. He's not the person who I think was the real representation of tennis becoming the really global sport that it is now. Rafa, to me, Nadal, is the bridge between the old era of tennis leading up to Federer, who himself actually used to use the old racket, and the bridge with Djokovic and what's come after him with this, very mechanical, precise, athletic version of the sport that we see now, and which so many people emulate. If you look at Jannik Sinner, for example, I mean, he's basically a product of watching Djokovic's whole life. So Rafa really is probably, in my opinion, the most important person in the history of tennis in terms of the transition and revolution in the game, not maybe in terms of the first name you think of, because that probably is still Federer, maybe Djokovic now. Okay, so that's a lot. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about his credentials or records or anything, because I do want people just to understand that sometimes as an athlete, your legacy is much more than what you do on the court. So for me, and I'm sure honestly millions of other people, Rafa's retirement is just a day to think about the way you approach life and live your life. Always, put your best foot forward and always try. And the best part of his mentality, beyond just the never say die attitude, there's a very, very famous line that he has, which is that, people always talk about how many injuries he had in his career, how many more things he could have won, if he could have done something else. And he just says to that, his mentality is, if, I mean, it doesn't matter. If is an if. It didn't happen. So, and that's not a negative aspect either. It's just a very realistic approach to life in which you just do your best all the time. And I think that's a fair way for all of us to approach our lives. Just keep pressing, keep pushing. Don't be too worried about the direct reward or immediate thing that's going to come after whatever you do. Just keep trying. Keep trying as he has tried for the last 20 years, and I'm sure he'll continue to do so. And hopefully you'll inspire someone else just like he's inspired me. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.